All right, guys, we are back from break, and I have the man, the myth, the dude, the legend, Steve Rude with me. Hey, Steve, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, and you're welcome.
A lot of people want to start off when they're speaking with someone about their origins, their where they were born, what their childhood was like. But I was reading and listening to a lot of interviews with you, and where I want to start actually is 1966 because I hear, based on everything I've watched about you, that is where your sort of origin truly begins in terms of your inspiration and your love of the industry. So how did this all start for you in 1966?
Well, this is, I suppose with everyone's life, there has to be a seminal year where there's going to be things that once you're born into the world, you're subject to influences with everything that's around you. Back then, the influences were different than they are now. There were none of the things we have now, and I'm kind of glad about that. But we had, our black and white TVs back in 1966. The occasional home that did have color was a reason to go over to that kid's house that day or that night so we could see what these shows actually looked like in color. But they were all done in color. They all had the foresight to know that there was going to come a day when everything was going to be in color. And it just so happened in the year 1966, a bunch of things came together, as things tend to do. And it was the year of Star Trek. It was the year of Saturday morning cartoons that I relish and worship practically. It made a huge impact on me. And it was also the year that a little Chinese guy named Bruce Lee came along in a show called The Green Hornet. And what I remember about that show was nobody cared about the Green Hornet. They were always talking about Kato because he was cool and he could kick and he could beat up guys like that. And that was something that Bruce himself made clear from the beginning of the show, that he wouldn't spend all this time beating guys up when he knew it would take him about literally a second to dispatch these guys. So that was another part of that schedule that was taking place during that year in September, which is when all the shows debuted.
So with those being the beginnings of your passion and your influence, one thing I was noticing when I was going through and researching I actually saw a video that was posted over on YouTube. You just going through your office and flipping through one of your sketchbooks, and you were imitating Disney styles and a lot of Jack Kirby, like muscle studies and stuff like that. And a lot of people would say, or casual fans would look at a grand artist or someone they idolize, like yourself or Neil Adams or whatever, and they figure they just wake up and do it. But it's so cool to me to see that every day, every year, as you go through this business, you're still breaking down and trying to learn. Is that something that you picked up just going through those influences and seeing how those things that influence you just evolved and steadily grew?
Well, I think that the best way to explain the sketchbook, the endless sketchbook studies, is just a compulsion on my part. I actually have the recent sketchbook that I've been working on recently, and I can hold up some of the things here, and you can see the kind of things I tend to do. And this sketchbook that we're looking at here I believe is number 36.
Wow.
So since the age of 19, when I got my first sketchbook, and that would have been in 1976, to 2019, this is what I do for fun. People look at these things and think, geez, you must be crazy or disciplined or something. No, it's neither. I just like doing this. This is what I do for fun. And as I turn the pages here, you can see all these different things that take place in these pages here. I'll turn the page, and you can see that basically everything is game here for me. It's on the top is a study of Sargent. On the bottom is a study of some Drew Struzan work. I turn this around, and there's some William Merritt Chase studies. and make sure everyone can see that okay.
Mm-hmm.
And just little things that catch my eye that I always figured that if I copy it, it might go into my brain, so I can use it for future things. Here's an outdoor study when I was on vacation with Janelle at this beautiful resort. So I just brought my sketchbook along and painted it on site.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Painting on site is an important thing that everyone who knows about art should engage in. It's part of communing with nature, I think. And when you're out there and you're seeing with your own two eyes, and you're feeling the ambiance of the place, it can be a very rewarding thing to stand outside and just try to copy nature with paint and pencil. But you can see every little thing that catches my eye is possible game for me drawing it.
Yeah, I see some more Disney there.
There's a lot of Disney stuff in here. I've been really getting into. I've been into the Disney artists for a long time. They have the capacity to abbreviate real life into simple cursive lines, and the characters are just as real as if they were rendered to death photographically. So I knew there was a secret going on there that I wanted to find out for myself. I'm going to turn the page here, and there's more Disney stuff. There's some stuff from the Supergirl TV show. And a lot of these are kind of warm-ups for things that I'm going to be working on that are coming up. And other things are just things that are good practice. Here, this is part of the art of caricature. How do we get someone who would never look like this in real life and make them look like they're real by extreme exaggeration? Oh, what do we have here? Oh, feet and elephants.
Oh, wow.
So this is all part of what I've done, just as a matter of compulsion. I don't know how else to describe it. It's certainly not discipline. Discipline is making yourself do things that you don't really want to do, but you know you should. Mm-hmm. And that's never been my thing. I've just been lucky enough to be so intrigued by studying, learning new things. That's where the fun is.
Yeah, a lot of people like to ask, and I've found myself asking a lot of. I've interviewed Neil Adams and several other people in the industry. They always want to ask, how did you break in? How did you push through those barriers and just kind of find the passion to keep going in comics despite all these roadblocks that are put in front of you? And a constant theme I'm seeing when I'm listening to other interviewees talk to you is that wasn't really you. Your passion about comics just exceeds just through and through. It's never been, sure, there are hard days, but it never has waned for you. You encounter a roadblock and you just swerve into the thicket and push harder on the gas rather than letting it stop you. And that's something that I don't want to say is unique to you, but something that is makes me really feel like I appreciate your artwork even more knowing. And I just wanted to talk a bit about your attitude about the industry and how that has kept you going.
Well, my attitude about the industry now is not one of glowing positive evaluation. To me, say for example, I was working for DC recently, and there's been so many changes, and the ones that I've noticed is the scheduling. I was offered a chance to work in a book, and because the team of editors that I was working with were so late on getting a script to me, these writers nowadays I don't know what's happened to the business, but this particular writer took several months to get me a script, and that's just not the way that's not the business I grew up on, especially with Capital or First Comics or Dark Horse. But there came a time when a trend began to take place, and that was it's almost like these guys that are noted as top writers and top artists are getting too big for their britches here, and the companies are catering to these these whims of theirs, where they can take all the time in the world to put these things out. And again, that's not the world that I grew up on, and I simply think it needs to be reversed. So that was one of the reasons that I encountered kind of a culture shock in working with today's editors is, where's my script? Where's my script? Well, it's coming, but it never seems to come. And another thing that really I find disheartening in the business is people don't make phone calls anymore. They don't talk voice to voice. And what I find is everyone uses email to express their thoughts or their opinions or their take on whatever they're getting from their creative partners. I don't believe in that. The more I see all this text stuff going on in these emails, which I'm all for. I don't text, but I certainly email. And maybe want to go back to always making sure I talk to people on the phone rather than email them. So I've kind of always been a rebel as far as what everyone else does that I know is wrong. I'm going to do the opposite because it just makes more sense. What makes more sense? An email? Sometimes it does. Other times it's far better to do a voice to voice and just hear the person's voice. There's advantages to both, and you need to use both. So that was one of the things that I encountered. Is this constant delays in getting scripts to me, which never used to be a problem. So, and then again, the prominence of the writer over the artist, which I'm told is something that's been taking place for a while. Things change all the time, Chad, in the world, in the business, and nobody ever quite has the foresight to see what's going to come next. But when it does come, you have to either decide if you're going to put up with it and go along with it and cater to it, or say this is not okay. We've got schedules here. And ironically, I've actually gotten quite a bit faster over the years, which I can't really account for it. Maybe I'm just working more out of my head and instead of going through the process of gathering all this reference. I still gather a lot of reference because when you're on Easter Island, you better dig up pictures of Easter Island, for crying out loud.
Right.
But a lot of stuff I think I finally coalesced in my head to the point where I can the figures and things like that, the gestures and the composition and the spotting of blacks, all vital stuff to being a comic book artist, have kind of come together a lot better over the years. And I feel kind of funny being able to do that. Like I should be not doing that. It shouldn't be this easy. But in fact, you have to let go of that kind of nonsense from the past and just say, well, if it's easy right now, and I don't seem to need anything more than just my imagination for these figure inventions, just go with it.
Yeah.
So
go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's kind of how I see the business nowadays. Having worked directly with the companies like DC these days is just people don't make schedules anymore.
Do you think another part of it may be decline, not necessarily like it doesn't happen anymore, but do you think part of it is that there's been a decline of the collaborative process between writer and artist? Because you were very fortunate to be a partner in something like this. And do you think that might play a part of it, that, okay, the writer writes the script and the artist does his thing based on the script, but you guys don't really communicate as much anymore? You're not in the same room. You're not really partners in this process as much as it used to be?
No, I don't, Chad. That's just a lazy excuse for people to not turn work in on time. People worked the way they did for a century and they never missed deadlines. So anything that people want to conjure up as far as why this is taking place, it rests entirely with the people. It starts at the top. Everything always starts at the top. So if the top people insist on working this way, getting things in on time, then that's the way it's going to be. And the people that can't keep up with it, as with many times as decades in the past, are just not going to get the kind of work that people that can make deadlines can. The fans want to see this work. I want to see the work come out at a regular rate. And but when you unleash that plug, Chad, a lot of things happen that never used to. You make allowances, and all of a sudden everyone's doing it. Mm-hmm. It's a bizarre thing, but it's a very human thing to do. I think it kind of ties in with would you rather do something the hard way and get more out of it in the long run, or would you rather have short-term satisfaction? And lack of maturity will give you the answer as to which one they're going to pick from that.
I had to ask because I figured that was your philosophy on it, but I asked because you hear a lot of people talk these days about the golden age or the glory days of like the Marvel bullpen and everybody being in there in this just sort of hive of creativity and everybody passing around each other's work and sharing each other's ideas. And then that's what's wrong with the industry now, trying to pin it on one thing or another. So I appreciate you kind of, from your vantage point in the industry, kind of giving that perspective, because I think there's a lot of explanation and excuses that goes on to explain the sort of behavior that you talk about away.
They're all excuses, every one of them.
Yeah.
You either come through and do it the way that you believe it should be done, the way it was done, if you think that's best, or you make allowances and everything just slides down a hill.
Yeah. You talk a bit about blazing your own trail, and you do what makes sense to you and do what works for you. And that I almost feel like there's no better way to emphasize that than saying, pointing to the Nexus newspaper strip. I know you were inspired by partly what the pitch you got from someone at DC with the Wednesday comics, which
that's right.
I find so incredibly awesome. But just seeing the value in that and going, wow, that's a great idea. We should do that for Nexus too. It just seems almost counterintuitive to the digital push that's happening. And, I loved it. When you guys said you were doing that and the Kickstarter happened, that was something that blew me away. It wasn't the fact that Nexus is back, although let's face it, that's part of it. The other part is just, oh wow, we're going to do this newspaper format and he's working full-size style. Explain your thought process on not just bringing Nexus back, but doing that, because I know the collected edition is coming out soon.
Yeah, it is coming out soon. And how do I explain it? Well, so much of it is just being in touch with something that's inside oneself. And things have changed so much since the time that Nexus debuted in 1980, 81. That you have, I don't know how else to explain it except that you become aware of things as you go out into the real world and go to conventions and see all this stuff going on, and there's 1,000 more people attending these conventions that want to get known for what they're doing. And there came a time when some of the changes that came about, Chad, were there were no more letter pages anymore in comics. So with that gone, how do you correspond with the people that are receiving your work and want to give their opinions on things? Well, by the 2000s, the letter columns were obsolete, and we weren't getting hardly any feedback on the work Mike Barron and I were doing at Nexus. Mike Barron being the writer, and I just knew it probably grew over time as I thought about this, that this has to change. So if you're gonna do something to wake people up again and just kind of get their attention again, you can't do the same thing over and over. And at one point, I was probably attending the last San Diego convention that I had done probably 10 years ago, and I was I was walking around the lounge area, and I happened upon a group of people, and there were two major comic book people holding court there, while everyone else just sat there kind of dumbly staring. And it was Neil Adams and Jim Steranko. And I kind of crashed the table and I said, you know what, I think I have this idea here where I think the future of comics should go. And so Neil Adams and Jim Steranko proceeded to tell me everything that they thought I was going to tell them. But unfortunately, instead of looking into the past, they were looking at the next technical gimmickry that would change our business in the future. I was looking strictly in the past. And part of the reason for that was the fact that the comic strips that beget comic books were going the way of the dodo. The only strips that were out there, and remember, these used to be read by everyone in America, adults and kids and everybody around the world. And now nobody pays attention to them anymore, especially the adventure strips. Well, I thought, and this is also due to having talked with Mark Chiarella from DC, who invented the Wednesday Comics idea. Well, why can't we conform these comic books to the strips again? I mean, nobody's doing it. There's no original strips out there anymore. And I thought, well, there's something wrong with the fact that nobody's bringing them back. The syndicates don't care one bit about the strips that they've owned for decades and decades now. They're not putting any money into them. The people that do actually do them, like the recent updates of Prince Valiant and the Phantom and things like that, are poorly paid. They're poorly treated. Well, when I hear those things, I know it's time to leap into action, like someone with a cape would do. So I did, and being one who doesn't believe in the word no or can't, I decided that if I had the right backing, I would start doing Nexus as a comic strip. And in fact, I didn't have any backing, so the only alternative at that point, Chad, was to do it myself. So that's really when you make a decision like that, you're looking at money, not someone else's money, but your own money. Mm-hmm. And this isn't hardly the first time I've had to put my so-called money where my ideas are, and that's fine with me. At least I tried. I was thinking back to that line from the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where all these crazy guys were kind of standing around this bathroom area where they had a water fountain, and something came up where they all decided that if they could move this water fountain, this 400-pound water fountain, that things would change in their life. But nobody was willing to try it. So Jack Nicholson, being the new guy there and having no idea of the can'ts of the situation he was thrown into, decided to move it. He couldn't move it. He tried. And they all started laughing at him. At the end of the scene, he looks at all of them, winded, and said, "At least I tried." That's what I want on my tombstone. If I believe in something, I'm going to try it. And I just don't believe anybody who thinks like me shouldn't do the same thing. Maybe not taking it as far as I take it sometimes, because a lot of times you're looking at you can't even afford house payments anymore. So I don't recommend it for everyone. Just the crazy types, the obsessive types, the people that know that if they don't try it, then all is lost. But at least something is gained if somebody tries it. And ideas beget ideas.
Yeah. That's something, the at least I tried mentality is something that you can kind of see. A lot of people ask you questions. A lot of artists will come to you and ask for advice and how to push into the career. And you say, just perseverance, push through and remain dedicated to what you're doing and make it your thing. I saw a video of one guy saying, I've got kids, I've got a wife, I've got the full-time job, and this is my passion. This is what I want to do. And you said, hey, kudos to you for trying as hard as you are, but you gotta change your thinking and tell your family, this is my thing. This is what I'm going to go for. And I love that advice, but a wrinkle I want to add to it is what you said earlier about the way the industry is, the schedule, the lack of a schedule, and the frustrations that are in the industry now. Different frustrations than what came before it, but frustrations nonetheless. How do you advise people pushing forward in the industry and making this their one thing, despite all those frustrations that keep pushing back at them?
Well, it's actually pretty simple, Chad. I try to break everything down in my life to very simple terms, because if they're not simple, that means they're complex, and people don't want to hear complex solutions to problems. I have two idols in life. One is Bruce Lee, and the other is Captain Kirk. The third one is Jack Kirby. These were guys that no matter what happened in their lifetime, they would persevere and carry on until they got what they wanted. And when they got what they wanted, they could tell everyone, I told you so. I love to be in a position where I would say to people, I told you so. But like I said, this kind of attitude is not for everyone. You have to have something almost volcanic or erupting within you to take chances like this. If it's not sincere, and if it's not genuine, you're probably better off not doing it. So you have to have a very specific personality type to take risks like this, where you're gonna spend $70,000 to $100,000 of your own money pursuing something that is, you have to do it no matter what. That's not a common attitude among most people.
It's not. I would say, a lot of people are of the mindset of take whatever work they can, and find, and even if I'm not passionate about it, it doesn't matter. At least my name's in print, and people can see either my art or the scripts I'm producing, the stories I'm telling. But it seems like your path, while you took some of the jobs that you needed or whatever, when you this is a very rare path. Nexus, of course, coming out of the gates with something that ended up being as popular as it did with you and Mike Barron. But at the same time, it's so distinctly yours, as opposed to a property owned by someone else, dictated by someone else. I wanted to know a bit about your particular path to this, because it just seems like almost, even though I'm not a writer or an artist, it almost seems counterintuitive to go, okay, the comics are big, the superheroes are big, I'm going to do this thing and work for DC or work for Marvel. And instead you went and said, no, there's promise in this, I'm going to do this. What was that like?
Well, at the time, Chad, I was trying to get work from Marvel and DC. The years before Nexus took place, which was just a very fortuitous fluke in itself, I would spend every cent I had to get up to New York. And at first I took a train, and then the year after that, once I got rejected from those places, I would take a plane, and I would just keep going back. And my idea was to get as much feedback from these great talents that ran these companies as much as possible. That's what I went there to find out. If I couldn't get work, I was at least gonna not walk away without finding out what I needed to work on. And as you know, whenever you ask somebody a question, even if they're 12 years old, they will give you an opinion on what they think about something. I was always more interested in gut reaction than people that overthought their appraisal of what I had done. Even to this day, I said, never mind the college paper version here. Just give me your gut reaction, because that's what means the most to me. If they see it and like it in their gut, then I've done my job just right. But yeah, I would go up there, and I would talk to everyone I could. When the editor-in-chief or whatever would kick me out of his office, I would go down the hall and just kind of walk in the rooms where people were working and strike up conversations with them. I mean, to me, that was fun. I wanted to know how they got these jobs. I mean, they were working at these great comic companies and I wasn't. I wanted to find out more about them. And that was so rewarding. They would sit there and they would be inking away in a cover, or they'd be drawing something, or they'd be pasting up something. And I just, that was so fascinating to me. And I just loved to sit there and just pick their brain about whatever they were thinking about. That was fascinating to me. They had things that I didn't have, and I wanted to have those myself. So my idea was, just common sense. If I kept coming back, I might get something. And in fact, I never did get anything. But in the meantime, this anomaly called Nexus came along. And again, I've always noticed that the biggest changes in things tend to happen at the beginning of a new decade. New singers, new musicians, new actors, new movies, new trends. And in the case of Nexus, apparently the time had come for independent guys working in the middle of the States to take their shot at publishing comic books, and I was lucky enough to be part of that.
Yeah, Nexus is a good, almost a good example of your sketchbooks. You turn the page and there's some other influence there. Because you see people try to encapsulate Nexus by saying it's adventure, or it's sci-fi, or it's pulpy, or it's this dark man haunted by these dreams, or trying to find all these influence. And it's so in the most beautiful way. It's so piecemeal. And a name that keeps coming up with regards to the pulp side of things when watching interviews with you is someone I want to know more about, because I pulled up some of his work today, and I didn't know enough, and I want to know more. So even though this is about me interviewing you, I want to hear a bit about this guy. Owen Campen was a big influence for you, and a big influence in your life. And I look at his work and I see a lot of you in that, and a lot of where you drew that inspiration. And I can't talk to the man, but I can talk to you, and I'd like to learn more about it.
I'm surprised by that answer. I was expecting to hear Roy Crane or Toth or Kirby or something like that. And you bring up my first grade teacher. Well, in fact, if I set the stage right, Chad, I had at the age of 19, I enrolled myself in art school. Now, that being the logical thing to do, and I got in. It was a 4-year college. We paid $850 a semester, and we were always complaining about how expensive that was. I lasted 2 years at that college, got fed up with what I wasn't learning, and I don't think anyone was going to give me a scholarship, so I left. And I thought, well, where am I going to go now? I was living about 2 hours out of Madison, where I was born, and in Milwaukee. And I said, well, I think it's time for me to fly the coop for good. So that was the year that I moved permanently out of the house. No more relying on anything from mom and dad. And moved back to my hometown. I had a lot of friends that were still there. And it was time to find out what I was really made of. Eventually, after a couple of years of just, living on campus and trying to get I had jobs, but they normally involved washing a lot of dishes. I think one of the first jobs I got was working at the IRS, and I was someone who was hired to take one box of somebody's tax records to another part of the building, and that's what we did to make room for new people that were having their tax boxes brought into that system. Well, they caught me looking at my own box one day. I thought, well, it's my box. I should be able to look at it. Well, the old battle axe that worked there caught me doing that, and they do what they always do to people like me, upstarts. They tell me they're going to fire me and I shouldn't be doing that. I said, no, I'm going to keep doing it. And so the day they fired me, we actually had a party, and I was invited. and we had a great time. I probably got to know those guys better at that going away party for Steve Rude than I ever got to know them in the 6 months I was there before that. But it was these goofy things that happen to me because I can't stand people telling me what to do or how to live my life. And if I know right from wrong and they're telling me something that I know is not wrong, I'm going to keep doing it. And I've been like that my whole life. And boy, it's gotten, as I tell the kids, it's gotten daddy into a lot of trouble sometimes. But there's no other way for me to live, Chad, than being like that. I kind of consider myself someone who, for everyone else who's too timid to take chances and blow apart the status quo, look at the way I live my life. And if you admire the way I conduct myself, then look at that as a pointing finger to something that's possible for everyone if they don't like being where they're at and want to change it.
Yeah, and that's the moment where Owen comes back and becomes an influence for you.
Pretty much, yeah. In those few years that I was messing around as a student, as a non-student in Madison, just kind of finding out what I was all about, I enrolled in Madison Area Technical College. It wasn't an art school or a liberal arts college. It wasn't the University of Wisconsin. It was a technical school, and that's where I met this older guy in his 60s, which ironically is the same age that I am now when I met Mr. Campen, which is 62. Actually, he might have even died at 62, but I'm not sure. I met Mr. Campen, and the first class I took from him was filmmaking. Mr. Campen, like a lot of teachers in technical colleges, teach multiple classes. And Mr. Campen was somebody that taught figure drawing, painting, and filmmaking. Well, I loved the idea of being able to grab a camera and seeing what I could capture on film. I liked it as much as the idea of drawing, being able to draw comic books or being an illustrator. So he was the guy that I went to for everything, and we butted heads originally. One of the things I did, me being me, was we were all asked to make a student film, and I made that film, but instead of just confining myself to the class itself and showing it to the class with Mr. Campen watching, I invited the whole damn school to come in and watch the film with us. Campen found out about that and got mad at me. But I knew it would blow over because he had never met anyone like me that was willing to take these kind of screwy chances. Later on, he apologized, of course. And that's when we finally broke the ice and got to know each other. And from then on, he considered me one of his, well, here's how the story goes. He invited me into his office one day, and he says, Steve, I've been teaching for 19 years. And in that time, I've only had a small group of students. I called them my 12. But until now, I've never met the 12th. And when he told me I was going to be added to that roster, one thing that went through my head was, how does he know this? I'm 24 years old. How does he know that I'm going to make something of myself? What does he have that I can't possibly perceive? And of course, later on, as the years and decades go by, Chad, you begin to understand how you can make assertions like that. And I was always very flattered by that. My relationship with Campen was always going to him with questions. And while everyone else just sat there and did their work and never came into his office and talked to him, that was nothing of what I was all about. I was there every day asking him questions. And of course, that's what teachers want. They want students to ask questions. And I was the question guy. I would practically run down the hall at some point and say, Mr. Campen, Mr. Campen. I'd see him walking out of his office. I said, why is the sky blue? Why is the sun yellow? And so that was kind of the way we interacted with each other up until the time that he passed on early in his early 60s. But Mr. Campen was the first guy to teach me the fundamentals, the real fundamentals of art. And remember, this was after 2 years at an actual art college where the teachers were fairly inept. I think anyone who's ever been to an art college knows the story of how inept a lot of these teachers are. I base my life on individual perception. Marvel may be staffed by hundreds of people, or DC may be staffed by hundreds of people, or AT&T, or all these giant organizations. But when it comes to evaluating people on a one-on-one basis, it's all about person to person. And that's one of the ways I conduct my life is to make sure that I get to know individuals. And if they want to adopt this kind of this guise of, well, I'm a company man, I try to move beyond that and find out what they're really all about. Do they really like the policies that they're working under? Do they agree with everything? What would they change if they could? Those are the things that I want to find out about the people that I talk to in life. And it goes on and on to this day. And that's where I find out what people are really all about and what they're like, kind of within themselves. That's the part that I want to get to know of people. And I'm an individual. I have no, the only people that I have any allegiance to are people that have earned it. Probably the most prominent being Mike Richardson from Dark Horse. He's just a wonderful guy. He always keeps his word. And he truly wants to engender a really good working relationship with the people he hires. He started Dark Horse for a reason. He had his ideals of how he wanted to conduct himself and his company, and he continues to do that to this day. And that's where I find myself allowing the most creative part of me to come out is working for a guy like that. DC has way too many damn rules going on. I don't agree with half of them. And I found myself being suffocated by them at some point. And I had to get out no matter how much money they were going to offer me. And it was a lot.
Mm-hmm. You know, what you said about the individual, the personality, that struck home with me. I found myself not on the verge of crying, but tearing up a little bit because I was without a job for 6 months personally. And it gave me time it was for the first time in my life, I decided to take unemployment just because I was always a person who didn't want to live off the government, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, you know what? I'm 30s. I'm in my 30s now. It's time to buckle down. I need to find a career, not just my next paycheck. So getting into finding more about the company, what they stand for, what their ideals are, it played so much more of a role than I could have ever thought it would than just a paycheck, just changing my focus for that one moment. And I found that just has cascaded into my outlook on everything else. So to learn that you think like that and that that's led you to where you are in your life, that's very encouraging to a young person like me. I really appreciate hearing that about you.
Well, good. I find myself through feedback tending to say the things that no one else does. And that's wrong. Everyone should know these things about life. Life is filled with unimaginable hardships and barriers. Every mortal person that comes into this world is going to encounter them. Some are going to test you to limits that you didn't even know was possible. There's great moments. There's very trying moments, and everyone goes through them. And the more we start to discuss these things among ourselves instead of being isolated from them, the better off everybody's going to be mental health wise. For
sure. I appreciate hearing that. And in that aspect, your respect for everybody you've worked with, especially the Dark Horse team and everything, makes me wonder about one of the things I wanted to ask you about your working relationship with Mike Barron. You worked with him for so long on so many things, continuing on and on and on. One can only imagine the sort of relationship you guys have. How much did your work on Nexus? How much did he ask you for ideas of plot, or you came to him for ideas on art, and it became such a collaborative process? How did that go for you guys?
By the time I met Mike Barron in 1978, he was bursting with ideas because he was working at one of these rank and file insurance jobs, and you can imagine how much a guy with exploding creative ideas, what kind of a job that did to his soul. These are soul-killing jobs. And when Barron met me, this guy about 8 years younger than him, who was dead set into doing comic books for a living, we somehow got together. And I've always recommended and told people that if you want something, you have to do the equivalent of standing in the middle of the road at the road most opportune for the job that you're looking for, wave your hands and make people stop and take notice. And that's kind of what I've been doing my whole life. So in those early days, I would walk around every outlet I could find that would maybe take my work in comic books. Maybe they needed a comic strip in their local newspaper. So I would approach these people, and eventually that's how I got to know Baron. That's how I got to know about him. They said, well, you know, we can't do anything for you, Steve, but there's this guy named Mike Baron. You might want to hook up with him. And that's how these things tend to happen. But you have to be actively looking for them. You can't just sit in your home and eat Krispy Kremes and watch Friends for a living. You've got to go out there and make it happen.
Yeah, it's that relationship that you guys had on that really shows through in your work. And I wanted to ask that because I had to know because it came through on the page. I had to know what it was like in reality. I try to keep these things a little short. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I did have one selfish question I wanted to ask you. When I started reading comics, I had 5 single issues as a kid, and it was only later that I actually got into the industry. I just kept rereading these 5 issues I just had sitting on my bookshelf, and one of them was Magnus the Robot Fighter and Nexus, the crossover, issue 2. It was a decade or more later that I got issue 1. But I reread the crap out of that book. And I got to ask about that crossover, because Magnus seems like a slam dunk for you, something that you would love and then be influenced by. So I just got to ask about that crossover, because it played such a big part in me wanting to move forward and learn more about this industry.
One of the memories I have as a kid, and this is even before the year 1966, barely, was reading Magnus Robot Fighter comic books. And the thing I remember about that book was that it appeared to be real to me. The stories were so well done, the artwork was so compelling, that what I read went beyond just opening and turning pages of a magazine. It felt real to me. It still feels real to me when I go back and look at those things. So having that kind of influence of something that stood out as being more than just something you read and forgot about, these things like Magnus stayed with me my whole life. And when I finally got to the point, Chad, where I could be part of the industry, those were the things that through my work I was going to try to contribute to. Is when you read the book, it made you, with my art in it, it made you feel like the story was real. Because I think if you just want to do stories that have an empty sense of passing to them, you're affecting no one in the way that you could if you had the will to go beyond that. So Magnus was actually plotted by me. I thought up this villain named Archon, and I have no idea where that came from. None. Where did that name come from? Why, when I was just sitting down and writing this plot out, this 2-page plot to give the Baron, did I come up with the name Archon? And months later, I looked in the dictionary and it says something about some kind of a religious figure that came down to benefit the world of some kind. Well, that's exactly what he was. Now, that's absolutely unaccountable. And it wasn't coming from something deep within my subconscious. It came out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And then later on, I thought, well, there was that Star Trek episode, Return of the Archons. And this all kind of came together in this bizarre, almost preternatural kind of a way that nobody can account for. This kind of stuff happens all the time with creative people. It's happened to me in my entire life. But Baron, I don't think he was so much. Baron and I have very different influences. So we're very much like that Gilbert and Sullivan thing, where people are just, the two partners are just worlds apart as far as how they think and what they do and how they grew up. And who can explain these things when two people that are so disparate come together and they form this seemingly perfect union, this this uninterrupted, smooth meeting of the minds, where everything seems to be done of one mind instead of two. So that's always been the situation with me and Mike Baron. But he created Nexus. Mike thought up all these things about the storyline and Ilum and everything. And I just was drawing the strip. I had a chance to put my imprint on it, in the way that all my influences would come out, as well as his own when he was writing it. So these two things came together, and out came Nexus.
Yeah, that world is just incredible to me. The Merc was one of my favorite characters for some reason. I could never explain why, but I had to gush for a little bit about that Magnus Nexus crossover. Archon was a great villain, and I found myself, because that was my first experience with Nexus. I found myself later when I was buying these Omnibuy, just going back and like, was he a villain from before? Where did he come from? So it's nice knowing his origin.
Well, I tell you, the things that you're describing are precisely the things that every fan before you and before me have become fans for. We see these things as we're at some point in our lives, they're beyond the norm. We get attached to them because they entertain us in massively important ways. They influence our thinking, and that influences the decisions that we make in our own lives creatively. And the fact that you were out of work for a long time, like a lot of people have endured, and had a chance to really think about your life and evaluate what do I really want to do, and if I can dream it, can I do it? And I think that's, if I had to give any kind of influence somebody's thinking about how they should conduct their lives, that's number one. I always think of life in terms of what they say when you're in an airplane. When in the case of an oxygen mask coming down, even if you've got a little baby next to you, put it on yourself first, because without being able to put it on yourself and help yourself, you're in no position to help others in a way that truly might make a difference in their life. You've got to cultivate yourself, and then whatever's left over that you might be able to give to others, assuming that they want to hear what you might have to say about things, will have a greater impact if you yourself have walked that path yourself and not just talk the talk.
Yeah, that's good. That's as beautiful a note as any to end on. But I wanted to give you one last thank you, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to promote anything you've got coming up, because in this comic book creator Steve Rude book that I've been reading, I saw this beautiful ad for the layout that's coming up with the collected edition of the Nexus strip, and I'm very much looking forward to that. I just want to hear about this and what you got else coming down the pipeline that people should look for.
Well, what you're talking about, Chad, is a compilation of the original Rude Dude run of the Nexus comic strip that is now going to be republished in its entirety, since we ran out of money at about issue 7 or so with the newspaper strip with Dark Horse. And one of the things I brought along was I wanted to show people the size of the originals that I work on for this upcoming Nexus newspaper strip. If I can reach over here for a second. This is the size of a Sunday newspaper strip from 1950. Mm-hmm. Just before Christmas this came out. And this, of course, is a sample page from the Prince Valiant strip, probably the greatest single adventure strip ever done. And here is a sample page from the upcoming Nexus strips. I'll back far away so you can see that. You can see they're identically sized. The actual originals are precisely the size of the Sunday comic strip that was so prominent in America and around the world for so many years, and that has now been left to basically just die a death that it's not worthy of. But this is the size of the originals. And everything is hand done. There's nothing digital going on here except for the coloring. The drawing is done with a pencil. The inking is done with a brush, and the lettering is done by hand. And that's the way I want to continue the rest of my life, is making sure that the things from the past aren't things that should be overlooked just because they're in the past. They have as much validity as they ever had But when new trends come along, everyone tends to jump on them. I'm not a trend guy. I love my traditional tools. And that's the way I'm going to continue to do my work in the comic book field that I love so much, and now the comic strip field.
Will that collected edition be a larger size format, or will it be more condensed trade paperback size?
It'll be kind of like the size of a lot of the IDW original art editions that you've seen come out that you pay this massive amount of money for. Hopefully Nexus will be a lot less cost-wise than that. But I think the actual size of the strips in printed form is going to be 11 by 17.
Wow.
So it'll be oversized, but bigger than comic book size and smaller than my 14 by 19 originals that I actually do them on.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Do you have anything else coming out? I mean, I know that I heard rumblings that the Moth might be coming back at some point, but that could just be rumor out there.
Well, I'm glad you're remembering things that I was going to forget to bring up. This is finally my chance to give the Moth what I call his due, and part of the upcoming strips that we're going to be doing will be Nexus shared by the Moth. So not in this upcoming oversized edition of comic strips that features exclusively Nexus. The next one that comes out, which we've already got in the schedule, is going to contain all new Nexus and all new Moth material, and I'm just super excited about these two things that I believe in so much.
Yeah,
to do.
It sounds wonderful. I can't wait to have that collected edition in my hands, and then the subsequent one with the Moth. In this day and age, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. I know you guys hold pretty tightly on to Nexus. You tried the animation. You're doing the strips. Will we ever see a Nexus film someday?
Well, there's two divisions on that. One is Mike Richardson's thought, and he wants, since he's tied into the feature film business, he's always wanted to make a Nexus movie. I care far more about my Nexus animated cartoon show, which I continue to work on almost daily when I take breaks in between the projects that I'm supposed to be working on. I go over to the animation board that Doug Wiley, the creator of Johnny Quest, had bequeathed me. Then I draw up ideas, storyboards, layouts for the eventuality of what I believe in more than anything on this earth, and will contribute more to world peace and happiness than anything else I'll be responsible for, and that is a Nexus animated cartoon show. So I continue to work on that, and we'll continue to work until my dying day, until I eventually succeed.
Yeah, I saw those 2 minutes that were posted over to YouTube, and I was very excited when I saw it. Someone just randomly linked it to me one day, knowing I was a Nexus fan, and said, "Hey, have you seen this?" And I was like, "Wait, this is real? This is a thing? Has it been previewed? Is Cartoon Network going to be showing it? Like, what is this?" So I can't wait for that to become a reality for you guys.
Well, thank you. I should probably end on a fairly philosophical note that I learned to believe in over the years. And I think as an artist, I think there's two factions that we do this work for. One, we do it for ourselves, of course. And the second is the fan reaction. And it's very much integrally linked in, unseparated, symbiotic relationship with what the artist does and how the fans react to it. And how the fans react is going to kind of get into this perpetual rerun of a kid grows up loving something. He eventually has to grow up and decide what he wants to do with his life. I decided I wanted to do comic books and be an illustrator. So all the stuff that I grew up on influenced everything that I now do. So for all the fans that may be watching this, that may see my viewpoints is a little atypical for most people out there, and if it gets them thinking about their own lives and what they would like to see coming up and how they spend the rest of their life, hopefully doing something of benefit to themselves, then that's a great motivator to me. And I think that's one of the purposes of as you age, you need to speak your mind to people who are just coming up in the hopes that what you can help them do with their own life is what you eventually ended up doing with your own life, which is finding your own path and then doing it.
Sounds good. I wanted to thank you, Steve, for taking the time out to come on this show and talk about your work in the industry and letting me geek out with you. That was a lot of fun as well. I say a lot to a lot of people that I interview. I say thank you for their time, not only for the show, but also for the people listening or watching. And I also say thank you for your influence in the industry on behalf of the comics fans. But for me personally, I rarely get to say this. Thank you for your influence on me with that first one, that second issue of that Magnus the Robot Fighter Nexus crossover. That was one of my very, very first introductions to comics. And I look around my room here and I've got original art and stuff up on the wall and trade paperbacks and books about comics history on these shelves. And I just, I can't help but say it goes back to those 5 issues that I read as a kid, one of which is you. So thank you so much for your influence, and thank you so much for your impact on the industry.
Well, it makes me know that I'm doing things the right way. So thank you.
All righty. You have a great one, Steve. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, Chad.